So I wanted to do a video here to talk about trauma in probate. Now, in the probate world, there's two types. There's the easy ones that roll through in a couple of months. Mom, dad, grandmom have done their estate planning, and it goes relatively cleanly. But there's a second kind, and that's the one that dominates my practice. And frankly, that's the one, or those are the type that you hear about all the money and all the conflict and all the problems. That's the high conflict probate. And, probate in some ways is the worst elements of family law or divorce cases and the worst elements of bad family conduct. But where we see this exposed is when someone dies and it hasn't been resolved. The childhood trauma, the adolescent trauma, the adult trauma that the beneficiaries are left with on the other side. Now, I have a background in domestic violence. That's kind of where I started, and I will always remember a law school professor, Paul Nino, talking about the fact that at the core of, in that case, it was a bunch of domestic violence, was sexual abuse within families. I'll never forget he said, and this is decades ago, if anybody had any idea the true magnitude of sexual abuse and violence in homes, it would be an international scandal. So now fast forward 30 years, and what he talked about then is absolutely exposing itself in probate cases like never before. There's another element in high conflict probate cases, and that is in virtually every single case, alcohol and alcoholism plays a key role. And I think that's throughout law and frankly throughout our society. I think probably in virtually every high conflict divorce case, in frankly any kind of crazy litigation, alcohol is a common denominating factor. So let's talk about why it is that death in the probate process triggers this and what I've seen over 30 years. And that is because many people cover over their trauma with coping mechanisms. When dad didn't love you, mom didn't love you, whatever, maybe you become the uber successful guy. You callous over the trauma with success. Some people go the other direction. Mom, dad didn't love you or whatever, and you become the hippie Peace Corps kind of person. Oftentimes people disengage entirely, and so the child leaves and they start their own family. Sometimes they're successful in those families, not wanting to repeat the mistakes of their own childhood. Sometimes they're not. But what happens is when that parent dies, the successful people over here who are still carrying those burdens of that trauma have to come back in and re-engage. I think it's the exception that when mom or dad dies or whatever, that the people over here that have estranged themselves, either formally, informally, or not, I think it's kind of the exception that they're able to just continue to stay disengaged at the death of the person or persons, mom and dad, that were the focus of the trauma. And again, here's why this comes up in probate so much. These people over here living their lives with the callous over of the trauma of, dad beating mom, being a drunk and, causing dysfunction in the family. The memories of childhood come up, and the deep-seated pain of the kid that didn't feel protected because dad let mom beat her or mom let dad beat her, or when there's sexual trauma. There is so much avoidance that occurred in the last decades when all of this trauma was occurring. And that's not just the mom and dad generation, I call them, but before that, grandmom and granddad. When we're dealing with mom and dad now in the grandmom, granddad situation, can't really tell which one has more trauma. Is it the greatest generation up here who were largely, kind of stoic, didn't talk about things, didn't do anything? That translated down to mom or dad now, and now this younger generation is dealing with mom and dad who, again, may not have developed healthy coping mechanisms. But what happens when the probate comes along is the people on the other side of the equation, the beneficiary class, can no longer avoid what happened that caused the trauma. When they're over here going about their lives and mom and dad aren't dead, they're still able to avoid what was happening, never have that confrontation. But what happens with death is death triggers it all. It comes just rushing back in. I've seen this over and over and over again. And there's almost a panic. You can feel the anxiety. You can feel the cortisol that's just rushing through on the beneficiary side of things. And what gets exposed more often than not is this cortisol rush, this adrenaline pump when the other side is dead or dying or whatever else like that. They're now having to confront the fact that if they didn't confront this trauma and all this stuff while they were alive, they're never going to be able to. And one of the real fault lines in the psyche is unresolved trauma. And so when the death happens and that unresolved trauma is still lingering there and they're not able to resolve that trauma again ever, that provokes real bad behavior and real conflict within probates. Now, oftentimes we're dealing in sibling situations where, mom, dad dies or whatever, and you got, good son, good daughter, bad daughter, whatever else like that. Many of them experience trauma in similar ways when they were in that family environment. Sometimes there's different trauma that's exposed. The perceptions of trauma were different. If one was a particular target of abuse, this is something I see often. So the family evolves over time. Maybe mom and dad early in the relationship or in the marriage, the family unit, were really struggling. I've seen this over and over again where, finances were really tough as dad was starting to get his career going, or, dad was in med school and mom was, struggling, and it was just mess for that older one right here, right? But then as dad got his medical practice established, the other kids start coming along, and there's a much easier pathway in some instances. So you have a conflict among the sibling group with this one up here, the older one that just knows nothing but trauma, and then maybe mom or dad kind of mellowed out and kind of experienced lesser trauma conflict along the way. So that conflict among that sibling group can be really problematic among that sibling group. Sometimes these siblings have worked things out, that they've kind of reconciled. Big brother knows it's not little brother's fault for what he went through. They were able to work this through. But every resolution, every family in this dynamic and how it's resolved is a personal story and a personal journey for each one of them. I can just tell you that in 30 years of doing this, one of the most critical parts of resolving these high conflict probates is acknowledging everything that I've just seen right there. Now, we're not going to work out all that trauma, all those hurt feelings within the probate, but I will promise you this: understanding what's going on there and talking through with these people in the beneficiary class, or maybe talking through with mom who lost the husband, is a critical component of the practice, because no question, papering over, get the probate done and easy is not going to solve all this. Who gets more money or not is not going to solve all of this. Relitigating what happened in childhood or early in the marriage, or those kind of things, is not going to solve any of that. And nor will assigning moral blame. I think the only thing that works is on the beneficiary side of things, acknowledging what has happened. And understanding it for what it is. We say often, hurt people hurt people. And if mom, dad, grandmom, whatever, were mean, bad, worse than that, invariably it's because whatever happened to them is what provoked down the line here. So the lesson for people that are not in probate yet, not dying yet, is get that stuff on the table. Someone's got to be the bigger person and stop avoiding the trauma, the conflict. I've seen the great stories, and I've dealt with extraordinary abuse in these cases, trauma, sexual trauma, violence, alcoholism, just horrendous stuff. And there have been miraculous kind of resolutions, right? So the dad just kind of wakes up at some point in time, hopefully while the kids are still alive, and says, man, I'm so sorry about what happened or what was going on earlier in the life. And, sometimes the trauma's too bad on the other side of it. Maybe, the kid turned into be a drunk alcoholic, a drug addict, whatever, because of what was happening over here. But more often than not, if there can be resolution, recognition on this side of the equation, the donor class, hey, I was bad, I was a son of a bitch earlier, or whatever else like that, and there can be some communication about this, That goes a hell of a long way towards kind of resolving things. And then among the beneficiary class over here, there's all kinds of sibling rivalry. Hell, going all the way back to the Bible, they talk about those conflicts among siblings. But those siblings can do their work if the other side has helped to do that work. And frankly, even if the other side doesn't, siblings can do their work together. Again, the impact in probate, the application in probate, is if we understand all this stuff, we can incorporate that into resolving the probate. The interesting thing is not often is really the money the big factor in these things. Usually the money's kind of clear where it's going or where the probate's going to wind up. But what isn't clear is the trauma involved in that. But I like to get this stuff on the table. We do a whole lot of talking to people in the beneficiary class over here and understanding these issues. You get that stuff on the table, it really moves things along a lot quicker towards resolution. So if you got a high conflict probate situation, you got to understand that navigating this stuff is a critical component to resolving it in the most efficient way possible. We can't solve decades of trauma, but we can at least understand where it's coming from, and with that acknowledgement, move the probate case through in a much easier fashion.